Welcome to Chronicles of Old Singapore. Well, in order to know what is Old Singapore, we've got to find out what is New Singapore first. Singapore is a global city today, an island city-state in Southeast Asia, south of China and east of India. So when people think about Singapore today, they imagine HDB flats. Singapore is also known for being very orderly and very clean. Old Singapore is, by reverse, those memories of Singapore before the great physical, social, economic, cultural, and political changes that took place in the last 50 to 70 years. So old Singapore is a kind of imaginary, right? There will always be old Singapore, and there will be many imaginaries of old Singapore at any one moment in time. Singapore is also a place, very forward-looking and with very little interest in history. The official Singapore story is very much a great man's history, right? And there are two great men in the history of Singapore. Sir Stamford Raffles, the founder of Singapore with the East India Company and beginning a long period of British colonial rule of Singapore, and the longtime Prime Minister, the late Mr. Lee Kuan Yew, who was the Prime Minister of Singapore between 1959 and 1990. However, in Singapore, there have been some hopeful signs about the role of history, the place of history, and the past in Singapore. There is growing nostalgia in Singapore today, a lot of fondness and sadness about the old places in the past. And there's rising awareness of the importance of our heritage among Singaporeans today. So what Chronicles of Old Singapore does is to bring out these little Singapore stories of ordinary Singaporeans. And who's the person who's going to do it? That'll be me. I'm Dr. Loh KS, a people's historian. 10 years ago, I wrote a book called Squatters into Citizens, which was a social history of the Bukit fire. This was the biggest fire in Singapore history and rendering nearly 16,000 people homeless in a single day. And, this fire has always been known to be one of the key moments in the history of Singapore in the 1960s. As it paved the way for the building of the mass public housing that is prevalent in Singapore today. The way I wrote it, though, was to focus on the people living in the kampong that was destroyed by the fire, the so-called squatters, and to trace their lives as they gradually became citizens of a new nation state of public housing. So that's the way that I usually approach the writing of history, history from below, a people's history. And you can check out the link below to get a copy of my book. I'm also a heritage consultant. I'm the director of Chronicles Research Education, a little consultancy that usually does research into the social history and memories of different parts of Singapore and the different places in Singapore. For business and for consultancy services, my email is below as well. Coming back to Chronicles of Old Singapore, I've always been curious about stories in the past. I love to uncover and listen to human stories and try to place these stories within the historical context of the times. And I'm an oral historian as well. I use the oral history method to let people speak as the voice of the past, as Paul Thompson put it. Every episode will have a guest to come on the show to talk about three main topics. One, interesting people and places. Two, change and continuity between the old and the new. And three, how it is important to document and conserve Singapore's heritage and history. So thank you very much for visiting the channel. Stay a while and listen to the Chronicles of Old Singapore.